Oh, and we're live. But we have a lot to cover. Even if we skip the policy questions, which is it's a privilege these days to not have to think about that.
Completely. I mean,
Nothing.
I could just tell you lots of my own personal thoughts, but they definitely would not be as informed or expert as Alana's. I can
We could talk about that for hours. Okay, well, hello everybody and welcome. I'm Leslie Feinzaig. I'm the founder and general partner at Graham and Walker Venture Fund. We invest in early stage, pre-consensus founders in unsexy spaces, like the real unsexy problems. And I was thinking that I chuckle every time someone says that they invest in like unsexy spaces like construction and defense. And I'm like, try childcare. Like seriously, like try a blowout or like elder care. Like them's the real unsexy spaces. I mean, I love some good construction tech.
That's
And
so
so
funny. Yeah.
my friends at Springbank Collective are really just like masters of investing in this space. And I've always admired your approach. And a few months ago, you guys put out a report that made me realize that we should have a conversation. And so welcome, Courtney.
Thanks.
I'm going to introduce you really quickly. I like have to look behind my phone to read your bio. Springbank Collective is an early stage investment firm that focuses on the infrastructure that supports women and working families. We're going to talk a lot about that. Courtney, I'm not going to butcher your last name. Can you say what? How do you say your last name?
It's Leimkuhler.
It's not that hard.
It's kind of hard. I would say my husband still struggles. So
It's one of those that like English words that the spelling does not match the sound in any logical way.
yeah, it's a German last name actually. So that'll do it.
Leimkuhler. No?
Leimkuhler. Yeah.
Leimkuhler. See, I already butchered it.
Leimkuhler. Yeah. Kind of like the fruit and then the letter Q. That's how you gotta remember.
Okay, well, now I'm not going to butcher it anymore. A co-founder and partner at Springbank, before which you spent your career in the financial services industry, from large publicly traded companies to fintech startups. I'm actually gonna let you talk about yourself more than me talk about you, but I want to say thank you. I know you're sneaking out of a really amazing conference to spend some time with me and with our founders. So why don't we start with just tell us about you? Like, how did you go from that kind of like large company, background to the world of startups and eventually to venture capital?
Yeah. A cool path for sure. I have loved every minute of it, but it has been maybe a little non-traditional. I started in big finance. I started at Goldman as an investment banker, but I think I was really lucky because I, I was basically reassigned quite quickly into an operating company that Goldman bought. And it was focused on trading technology at a time when most trading was still done by humans because I am an actual dinosaur. So that is what was going on at the beginning of my career. But it was totally revolutionary, the idea that you would, trade exclusively using computers and tech. And so that really like got me interested, not just in tech, but more like how do established industries like digest and metabolize innovation and tech? And I basically spent like the rest of my next kind of 15, 20 years doing that. So I worked for Goldman doing a lot of trading tech and M&A related stuff. And then I went to the New York Stock Exchange when it was still a nonprofit. So I worked on taking that first
Hold
private.
the horses. The New York Stock Exchange started out as a nonprofit. I did not know.
Of course. Yeah. It's a multi-100-year-old institution that began as an industry utility, basically. Yeah. So it's owned by all the banks and broker-dealers, and it was run as a nonprofit.
Courtney, I am told that I am causing major echo, and I think that it's my headphones. So I'm going to
switch. Chill.
Live try to fix apologies, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, great.
Okay, Vanessa, who just texted me, thank you. Can you text me and tell me if I sound okay? Is that better? Let's just pretend that that's better and keep going.
Okay, we'll keep going.
Yes. All right. So note to self, never use these old little cords.
Oh, great. For what it's worth, I did not hear an echo, but you sound great. still.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, everybody who's chatting. That was actually
Awesome.
really helpful. So thank you for that. So
Yeah.
we were talking about the New York Stock Exchange. So you went from Goldman,
Yeah.
kind of
So I
let's
blew your
invest in
mind. It used to be a
operating.
nonprofit. Yep. But yeah, so I spent 10 years there, and we turned into a private company. Then we took it public, and all of that was driven by tech and like the evolution of the industry. So that's always kind of been my favorite angle. After we sold the company in 2013, I went to Marsh, which is the world's biggest insurance broker, but kind of with the same idea, like, wow, it's the beginning of insure tech, and how's this old industry going to metabolize tech? And so that was a really cool part of the world to be in, a really different element of risk, and risk transfer. That's sort of like really, in some ways, unsexy where you talk about it. Like that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Like no shovel goes in the ground until you've got your insurance policy or you produce your certification or whatever. So um, that was also a kind of fascinating period to be there. And so when I left Marsh, I more wanted to get back, like, in large public companies, you spend a lot of time in a way kind of doing the backwards looking stuff, readouts, reporting, public earnings, et cetera, which are all super important. But I loved living like in the world of the future, which I felt like I had done before.
Mhm.
And so I took a year. I actually traveled with my family, which was such a huge blessing and privilege. And then kind of started thinking about like what else is tech disrupting? Like where else are, like what are the other things in a way that feel inevitable? The way that, stock trading going from humans shouting to technology felt inevitable, or, insurance not faxing things and mailing checks anymore. Like it feels kind of inevitable. And one of the things that felt really inevitable was like just the massive social changes that were happening, in terms of everything from women in the workforce to an aging population to an exploding, healthcare liability for us, as a society, let alone at an individual level. Massive wealth transfer, from baby boomers to millennials, and generally speaking, from men to women. And so all these things were like, wow, there's a whole lot of stuff that we just haven't really bothered to build because we didn't have to. We were a young society. We were a society of, stay-at-home parents. We had a workplace that assumed someone would stay at home. We, have had healthcare that kind of worked, and Social Security sort of was good enough. And all of these things were going to start to break, right? And these were like the backbones of like our very existence, our society. So the inevitability seemed obvious. We are going to build better systems because we have to. It's no longer a sort of nice to have. Like not having this infrastructure is creating massive economic liability for us. And so that's what I got excited about. I linked up with Alana through a mutual friend of ours, Jen, and the three of us just kind of got really excited about trying to find investments that fit that thesis. So we experimented for a couple of years before we actually raised the fund, just to prove to ourselves that there was a there. And so the winding world to venture was almost like, if you wanted to invest in this, venture was the only vehicle because
Yeah,
these companies
that's
were
what.
so early, right? There was no like buyout strategy for
Yeah,
investing in these new systems
yeah.
because these companies were just being created. So some of the most fun work we did in the beginning was just like actually helping these founders find each other in a way. And I know you've done a lot around the female founder stuff. We were more like, who's building solutions for families, right? Who's building stuff for women? And like, let me introduce you to each other, And so we did build this uh, sort of network called the FamTech Collaborative or Collective, I guess it's called famtech.org now, with a couple other like leading founders in the space, people who were really on the front end of this. So like Lynn Perkins from Urban Sitter, for example, a woman named Amy Henderson who um, was working her own way to kind of bring founders together. And that was actually some of the most fun work in the beginning was, they were like, oh my gosh, wow, other people are doing this, and let's call it a thing. Let's call it FamTech, for example. So that was super energizing. And it's cool to see even in like 5 or 6 years how the market's evolved so much. It's become much more mainstream.
How long have you been working on Springbank? You guys on your second fund now?
No, we're on fund one. We are like 6 years into the strategy, I would say. So we started deploying capital kind of off our own personal balance sheets as angel check writers in like 2018, 19. Then we went out and catalyzed a network of like 100 individuals and family offices. And we did deal by deal investing. And all of it was just proof of concept, like if we were going to commit the next however many decades of our career to this, could we really prove that there's a there, and that they are venture scale and you can make great returns for your investors. So we had a couple of years proving that. And then we did the first close of the fund in the beginning of 2022.
Got it. I want to take a moment to highlight your co-founder, Ilana, because she is also just like a
The best.
spectacular badass.
Yeah.
And she can join us today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about her and what her background is and how the two of you hooked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Alana is amazing. We have a lot of overlaps. We were at business school at the same time, but didn't know each other. And so I am forever grateful to our mutual friend Jen for connecting us, because Alana and I are very different and complementary in a way that I don't know how much we would have found each other had someone not really kind of smushed us together. And it is just like the best partnership. So Alana is amazing. She started her career kind of in advocacy, was at the Center for American Progress very, very early days. And she's always been really, I think, at the intersection of like government policy, gov tech, and just thinking about, how do we build like a better society using tech? And that's just like really been her ethos for, I think, her entire professional life. She went to HBS, which is where I met her, and she also has a degree from the Kennedy School. She ended up on the transition team and also in the Obama administration. She worked in the State Department. She did one of the US's first like tech and innovation challenges in Africa. So she has just done an incredibly cool portfolio of things. She worked for McKinsey in Africa mainly for a few years in the tech, media, and telecom group. And then she had a bunch of roles, building her own consulting firm. She did work for Etsy and for Google and a bunch of other really cool, leading tech companies. And then right before we started Springbank, she was working for Eric Schmidt's family office on the impact side, doing everything from kind of political donations to equity and debt investment. So she's kind of seen all sides of the cap table and is incredibly well, not just like connected across policy and tech worlds, but I think just so pragmatic about like what is the right type of capital for this particular opportunity or problem, and really, really clear eyed on that. So she is a fantastic partner, and we're based in New York, and we sit together most days.
I like live present. So were you both in the same HBS class? Were you both 09?
No, I'm actually '07, so I'm the same year as you. And
I
then
didn't know that. We didn't know each other.
yeah, I know we didn't know each other. I know. But I'm sure we have 1,000 mutuals. So I'm
And
a
I
seven.
apologize to the audience for the just one moment of obnoxiousness when we're going to talk about HBS. And then we'll come back to like
We'll
being
come
not
back.
obnoxious, like really soon. We're normal
Yeah,
people.
totally. Yeah. No, she was '09 from the combined. So
Oh,
she
because she
would have
did the
been like
double.
the entry class of '08 for HBS. Like her reunion class would be the class of '08.
Got it.
Um, and Jen, who introduced us, I went to college with Jen, so I've known Jen for 1,000,000,000 years. Jen was the class of '08 and overlapped with Alana in their first year at HBS.
That was like a whole generation that sprung a number of like really amazing companies. Like there's really kind of that kind of late aughts and early 2010s, where there's
Mhm.
some amazing people out in the world. The two of you being two of them.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
so you spent like the early part of your career basically like upgrading infrastructure in different spaces with technology, and you want to do
Mhm.
the same for women and families. Is that fair to say? So, like,
Yeah, I think that's a really,
what does that
really
look
good
like?
summary.
What is that infrastructure?
I think it's one way of describing it is almost like the backbone of modern life. It's sort of addressing the sort of core infrastructure, the critical systems in a way of, like how we work, how we integrate work with our life, how we care for one another, like these things that are just fundamental to the existence, to the sort of parts of us that are very human. We have to earn, we have to provide, we have to care. And those are things that have just become really hard. There's a lot of consumer life and existence that has become much easier and cheaper over the past couple of decades, right? Like I have Doritos and 15 minutes if I want them. But, finding a daycare spot is, I literally can't find one to save my life. And so I think we've really pointed our innovation engine at things which have driven mostly convenience and, cost reduction in some categories. But unfortunately, in other categories, which actually are the ones that absorb the vast majority of like our mind share, our wallet share, those costs have basically ballooned, right? Everything from education to healthcare and
Yeah.
lots of stuff in between. So, yeah.
And what are some of the things that you kind of look for as you try to apply that lens on your thesis?
You mean like company characteristics or like
Yeah.
thematics?
Let's start with thematics.
Yeah. So when we think about it, we kind of bucket into three big themes. We call it career, care, and consumer, or kind of how we work, how we care, how we live. And within that, we're really attuned to like what's the why now of a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, between the kind of demographic imperative and technology enablement, like there is huge space, I think, for innovation and growth, which is really cool. So in the theme of kind of career and the future of work, we think about the fact that the nature of work is changing. Obviously, even before AI, like 60% of the jobs that were in the BLS survey or something, like 80 years ago, are gone. Like they don't even exist anymore. And so when we think about the way that technology is transforming the workforce as well, like things are only going to get more fluid and move more quickly. And so what does that mean, especially for small businesses, frontline workers, women, entrepreneurs? There's a lot of potential risk, but there's also a huge amount of opportunity, right? Like we will have the first single employee $1 billion company in not that long, right? Thanks to kind of the evolution of tech. So some really cool stuff on the workforce front, especially in areas that maybe have been overlooked. Like we've had a lot of innovation in knowledge workers, but not very much when it comes to frontline workers or deskless workers or gig economy workers. And so huge opportunities there that we get excited about. Um, Second thing is just thinking about like how are employers thinking about the new world of work. And we've had some big moves on this one in terms of employers' responsibility. But I think when we just think about the pure economic reality of rising healthcare costs, for example, the fact that we have more women with young children in the workforce than we've ever had before, when we realize that we have an aging population and we have to figure out how to cater to the needs of a sandwich generation employee. I think there's some really cool opportunities there to rethink, like, what does it mean for employers to have a role in healthcare and wellness and caregiving responsibilities and things like that. So those are a lot of the categories that we're interested in on the kind of work front. In care infrastructure, it certainly covers childcare, elder care, certain areas of women's health, of course, are things that we look at as well. And they're same thing. I mean, huge demographic changes are driving care. Women are the providers of the vast majority of both the paid and the unpaid caregiving that we do. And they are getting older and they have, other responsibilities. And I think they feel more empowered to kind of demand support in a way that they haven't really before. And then women are obviously the decision makers. So we know they control a lot of purchasing power, but we also really direct all the healthcare spending, not just for their own nuclear families, but this idea of like the alpha daughter who calls the shots when it comes to their parents' care and caregiving is a really significant force in healthcare, which is really interesting and cool. And then women taking more control of their own health, right? And not just being told, yeah, sorry, menopause, guess you'll have to suffer, right? And just really recognizing there are these women specific conditions that we can address. And then there's also this general conditions that just affect women differently or disproportionately. So huge areas of opportunity there. And then last bucket of, what sort of how we live, what's our consumer life, things that I feel like are really interesting there. A lot of it does touch some of the areas that I really love, like fintech and insurtech, because the truth is consumers, we have wild productivity gaps between what we experience at work and what we experience at home in terms of like the
Um,
tools and software. So we got to bridge that gap and we will. And men and women are demanding better stuff there. And then just this idea of like, I call it sort of the off balance sheet liabilities of humans, individuals, like retirement, healthcare, long-term care, the cost of your Gen Z kid moving back in with you, the cost of, your mom living to 105, it turns out. These things that like we haven't really built product for, we haven't really kind of designed our financial lives to be ready to accommodate. So those are some other really cool areas that I like hunting around in.
Do you feel since you started really, really paying attention to the sector and testing the strategy, like do you feel like investment has moved in any meaningful way with you?
For sure. Yeah, I think some one of the analogies that I like is, I think the way that things like climate tech felt very sort of niche or edgy, maybe like 10 years ago. In some ways, I think a lot of the areas that we invested are similar. People at first are like, huh, it feels like kind of like women's issues, and I think we're reaching this point where everyone's like, okay, no, they're not women's issues. Like they've been women's problems because we've sort of like defaulted to that. But actually they're everyone's issues. Everyone feels these gaps in infrastructure. And I think there's a growing awareness that the same way bridges and tunnels and roads are required to get people to work, care infrastructure is required to get people to work. And we can't just expect that these things will be filled by people quitting their jobs or by, volunteerism or philanthropic activity. Like we have to kind of really build like we mean it when we think about laying down the track and the systems for a prosperous, participatory economy, which is what we all need, especially if we've got an aging labor force. So I think the discourse is changing for sure. It has to, like, you're in venture too, right? It's great to, and I like how you call it pre-consensus, like it's great to see things early, but can't be that early. We need other people to kind of come in,
No.
see what we see, and finance the future of these companies too.
Um,
So I'm gonna grab some water.
no, no worries. So get some water. So I'm gonna check the battery on my phone because it turns out that I know I have battery issues. Guys, can I just say to everybody, like I am solo parenting this week. I am simultaneously diligencing 4 deals. And last night my daughter decided to talk about death. So like, real struggle here. All right, like real time.
I'm
This
taking
is
you with me because my phone is also dying, and I'm gonna go ask someone for a charger.
I was rather get him because I'm solo parenting, and so I cannot actually charge my phone. But we're gonna have a great conversation
That is so
until my
funny.
phone gets to
Yeah,
like
this
one
thing is
percent and
speed.
dies.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm at 13, so let's see who gets there first.
okay, I'm at 17, so I feel like I'm winning.
Yeah.
One, thank you, Vanessa. Please do talk to my. Like seriously, what do you tell kids when like they get out of bed at 10 o'clock at night and you are literally like in somebody's data room and they want to talk about what happens when you're gonna die? That was me last night. And then she started crying, like, Mom, what am I going to do without you? And it's like,
Oh my gosh. That my strategy is distract, distract, distract. I start planning their birthday
wow,
parties with them. That's how I do it.
that's great. I may
Those
or
are
may not have
conversations for
promised a
daytime,
Disneyland
not
trip.
nighttime. Yes.
Thank you to all the parents that are like sending love over in the chat room. Like, that's what's just really appreciated. And I apologize for the echo. We're gonna try to fix that in the next one. I don't know what else to do to fix the echo. Hey, Substack. If anybody is listening, can we please have Substack lives from our computers? Thank you. Love
That would
listening.
definitely be better, I think. Yep.
Jesus, yeah, it's just so bad we have to do it on the phone. Um, One thing that I want to touch on, and then we're going to talk about the Silver Economy report that you guys put
Yeah.
on earlier this year. It's an area that I'm paying attention to, but I have not really made an investment in yet, but would
Yeah.
really, really like to. Um, so one thing that I'm tracking is I feel like I'm an expat here, right? Like I'm an immigrant in America. I did not grow up like this. I grew up very much in like a village type of upbringing, right? With like a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
family around and that's not my reality as a parent.
Yep.
And I think it's like um the sort of the systems of American life are built on the idea that like every family has a built-in primary caretaker,
Yeah.
like a sort of a unpaid person who is responsible and like will be there to like make all this stuff. And we've moved to dual parent households and or rather dual worker households, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now this is where, you know, I don't want to say the shit hits the fan, but it just came out. So like that, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes, that's a better
Um,
one. Yep.
but I also feel like there's a little bit of a cultural backlash that is happening specifically in 2025,
Hmm.
around like what is the role of like the mom or the caretaker. And so do you feel like are you caught up in, or do you feel that's just like a pendulum that will kind of come back? And do you think like socially we're kind of like seeing the
Yeah.
resurgence of the what they call the trad wife, right? Like the like and it also because
Yeah.
the like employment is kind of like a very, very messy picture.
Hmm.
We're seeing a lot of women exit the labor force, whether by choice or not.
Hmm.
Um, so how are you tracking all of those
Yeah.
changes? Do you think that they're short terms or something bigger happening here? I know these are really big questions, but
Yeah, they're big questions. Look, a couple things. I'd love to see your data. The data that I've seen is we actually have, more women with young children in the workforce than we have ever had in the history. And that, in a way, the opportunity for flexible work has drawn a lot of women into the workplace. Now we can discuss whether those are good jobs and whether they're dead end jobs, and there's sort of a lot of discourse there. But I think that the truth is, first of all, we don't have this infrastructure and it will continue to force people out of the workforce. And as long as we continue to have this sort of wage disparity between men and women, I think it makes sense that, the person who earns less is the one who ends up leaving the workforce. And so part of what we have to get at is also the economic reality of why do we have these wage gaps? How can we address their emergence? And, there's a recent paper just out from, I think, Harvard saying a little bit of the like obvious. We felt a little like, is this actually newsworthy, right? But especially after women have children, the wage gap that emerges, like it never closes. Um, I think that the answer to that, to be honest, is going to, in large part, be solved by a lot of social change. Like, I think that the fact that women graduate from college at a rate that is significantly higher than men, which, by the way, has been true for a long time, it's just that the gap is widening significantly. Women have higher grades than men, right? But women also have more student debt. And so we have to kind of address like what are the different barriers to women kind of staying in the workforce and hanging in there. But I think as we have more two income households and we have more men who are sharing the burden of caregiving, which again, the data says that that gap between men and women still exists in terms of who does more caregiving, but it has narrowed considerably. To me, like one of the main levers is just engaging men in this conversation and not pretending that, the challenge of care and work and these sorts of things is like a uniquely women's problem. It is, a problem that men are feeling too. And I think giving men the opportunity to act as caregivers and talk about their role as caregivers is really meaningful. And as we engage men in care, men still make most of the decisions and control a lot of the power in organizations. But as they themselves want something different for their own lives, like I think we can all benefit from a sort of changing zeitgeist on that, which I think is positive. The second thing I would say is like, I don't I think the trad wife thing, I don't know how big that is, really. Obviously, it gets a lot of views. Um, I think we all wanna do what I consider, like, the love part of care. And I think for a while, we got into this discourse where all care was work and, we didn't wanna do it, and how can we outsource it? And I think we're getting to, like, a more nuanced conversation where I think of care has 2 parts. It has love and it has work. And actually different people view different tasks differently, right? Some people cooking is love and other people cooking is work. So, people may determine their own expressions of love and caregiving differently, but they have these 2 components. And I think what we're really talking about is like, how do we drive innovation to lessen the burden of the work part of care so that we as humans can like more engage in the love part of care? I don't want to outsource the love part, but I'd really like to outsource the work part in some ways. And I think just giving people a little bit more choice in that is really what we're talking about, not this idea that like we all are just workers and we need someone to, deal with these children that we produce. Like that's not the narrative. And I don't think that's like a human goal, actually. Like I don't think there's a big market for that type of value proposition. But I think if we can distinguish how do we make care jobs more sustainable? How do we make them worth a living wage? How do we make them less burnout? How do we reduce the administrative burden associated with some of these jobs? Like that becomes really interesting and I think can like uplift the quality of care and the sort of enabling elements of care in a way which is like actually super exciting as a human and as an investor.
I feel like you just put into words, like in the most succinct, like it's just such an effective way to think about like there's a love part of this and there's a work part of this, and it's not a single bucket. I feel like I've intuitively felt that as a customer, right? Like or as like somebody who lives through the problem of
Right.
a dual worker household with
Yeah.
two small kids, right? Like um it's so true, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a big part of this job that I would not want to give to anybody else. But I feel like the part that is draining takes so much that it almost
Yeah.
like it leaves less time for the parts that you want to do more of. It leaves
Exactly.
you like completely depleted, right?
Yeah.
So when it's time to have the conversation about what happens when we die, like I'm completely exhausted,
Yeah. You're not there
right? Like it's like I
completely.
just want to go to bed.
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. And I mean, I feel like so relatable for anybody who's trying to be an active parent while
Yeah.
also like working, right? Like
Yeah.
having a job and like
Yeah,
bills.
exactly. Which frankly we all are. I mean, the
Yeah.
portion of the society that can afford to choose between care and work is an unbelievably small, tiny
Right.
market.
Right.
And that's
Right.
why like there's so much awesome investment to be had because we are all, dealing with this. It's this infrastructure that every single one of us needs to get and
Yeah.
have built. Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
shopping for a plug now that I found a charger, which is very
Yeah,
exciting.
we're gonna have to end this conversation like when my so I'll tell you. Battery update. We are at 12%. Okay, I think we're gonna make it.
All right. I am at 10.
Guys,
I'd like to
we're gonna make
report.
it so much more professional next time, I swear. It's just like real time.
We're just having some real
Um,
talk here. Yep.
so from childcare to the other the other end of our lifetime. And initially I wanted to chat with you about the silver economy report. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that um, I think a lot about like what are the blind spots in venture capital
Yeah.
and like what are the true sexy or unsexy spaces, like I said earlier. And I feel like in mainstream VC, longevity is super hot.
Yeah.
And it's almost this like avoidance of the fact that our bodies are frail and like there is an end to this, right?
Mhm.
How appropriate to talk about this after my really bad parenting conversation last night. Um,
Yeah.
and that's where I think I'm like, when people talk about like investing in like aging, so much of the sexy stuff is in, the never die world. In
Yeah.
reality, like,
Mhm.
um, there's this massive, massive, like, snowball that's coming
Yeah.
with the boomer aging population.
Mhm.
And so I love that you guys are paying attention to this space and investing in it. I am like kind of call for startups, right? I really, really like that space. Tell me about what inspired the research that I also want to call out
Mhm.
Monique at Cake Ventures that you
Yeah.
collaborated with. She's amazing.
Yeah, too.
So what inspired and what did you guys what was the work of putting together that report? We're going to share a link to the report with everybody afterwards.
Mhm.
Or if
So,
somebody can put it in the comments, that would also be great.
yeah. Um, Look, aging society, as you say, is the reality that we live in, and it's the driver of a lot of other areas of, I think, kind of gaps and infrastructure and potential investment. I think what we got excited about in terms of the idea of the report was just that I like to say often, like, there's no prize for identifying, this could be improved, right? And I've seen that, like, in insurance, and I've seen that in trading, like, "Gee, that looks inefficient," well, duh, right? I mean, like, okay, yeah, so we all see that we shouldn't be, whatever, faxing or, trading face to face sometimes, or that, there aren't process improvements. But obviously, what is really the hard work and where there is a prize is for figuring out what is the solution that, not only is technologically better, but can actually be adopted, right? That people it preserves whatever is the essence of, the activity in and of itself, but brings a level of advancement, productivity, et cetera, that people are willing to adopt, and it can actually like survive contact with the real world. And so much innovation that I've seen in my lifetime is a brilliant idea. It makes tons of sense, but there's no way anyone's ever going to use it. And I think that felt very acute to us in this world of aging as well, which is we all know, just interacting with our own loved ones in our family, right? So like, mom, there is a much better way to do this, right? But we also know that mom doesn't want to do it a different way. And so, what's really interesting problem to unpack when it comes to aging is we know that we have a lot of opportunity here, but we know that it has almost like kind of unique elements of product adoption and also buying behavior. And a little bit back to what I was talking about with this alpha daughter, one of the things that's really interesting in aging and kind of elder care is oftentimes the buyer of the product and the user of the product are two totally different people with completely different motivations. And so when we were thinking about the research, it was really around like in a world where, you know, forget TikTok, forget influencers, right? We're back to like AOL, Facebook, like these people are Bing, right? They're
That
reached
email
in a
address.
in a really different way. But then actually forget that, right? Because that's actually not how anyone is searching anymore. They're going to search using ChatGPT, right? These is evolving so quickly. So just this first thing of like, how do I find these people? How do I talk to them? Like, what are the platforms that they exist on? Where are they? And then how do I market to them and kind of can drive that conversion when they may not be the buyer or they may not be the user, and I've got to somehow find the adult child as well. And so that was really the interesting question for us, was more less like what are the innovations that people need, but more what is what is actually the way in which we're going to reach this population? How are we going to build trust with them? Who do they listen to? How are we going to drive conversion? And how are we going to engage the other decision makers that we know are involved in this process? Because they're the ones that have to go to the house and set it up, for example, right? Or they're the ones that have to pay for it and have to try to figure out how to incentivize dad to use it. So those were some of the like motivating questions for the report.
What do you think? How are folks using, like, is this something that you talk to your portfolio companies about? You're applying it as an investment lens?
Both. Yeah. So we have, one of the companies in our portfolio that's living this the most and has also taught us a lot and helped us as we thought through this is the company called Careful, which is in the elder fraud space. So another mega trend, right? Obviously, elder fraud has been a problem for a long
Yeah.
time, and AI is only exploding the potential risks here in terms of course, voice duplication, things like that. And so Careful is in the elder fraud protection space. So it's basically sits on top of your financial accounts and will survey them for, unusual behavior and will flag it to whoever you want. So it can flag it to you as the individual, maybe aging adult, can flag it to your financial advisor if you authorize that, or can flag it to you, Leslie, as the daughter, right? Hey, it looks like mom paid the utility bill 3 times this month. Or hey, there's like a new, monthly recurring transfer that's, 3 times larger than it used to be to the cleaning company. Does that make sense? Um, and, Careful has to think about who this is not a D2C play, right? Like who are the trusted folks in the network of that aging adult? Is it the financial advisor? Is it the parent? And actually, the financial advisor really wants to think about that too, because these assets are going to move, right? And today they probably have no relationship with those adult children. And this is like a great way for them to build a relationship. So it's just been really cool to think through like, how do you discover and unpack the ecosystem around aging adults, who they trust, whose opinion matters to them, and who is incentivized to help get it right for them, not because they care about older adults, which hopefully they do, but also because there's like other incentives and business opportunities for them to kind of get it right.
We picked off of your report that 36% of older adults report fraud exposure and 27% of caregivers have encountered scammers. I mean, like on a personal perspective, both my parents have been targeted. I mean, I feel like all of us have been targeted, but I
Yeah.
do think that technology is changing so fast that that there's just like a much there's like an opening right now.
Yeah.
I think we're all worried about what this means, right? Like
Yeah.
for ourselves and for our families.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a big problem.
Um, a lot of the report was around best practices in go to market.
Mhm.
And so what does a winning go to market playbook look like for a silver tech company?
Um, I think one of the main takeaways from the report is like we need to be talking with older Americans and not to them or at them. And so much of innovation feels like a young person's game. And so I think a really important part of the playbook is integrating with folks who have a long experience set of actually interacting with older Americans as peers and trusted advisors, and as part of the sort of fabric of their existence. And that's why, like, we joked about some of the older brands, but that's certainly a generation that does trust brands and has built, long-term trust with certain platforms that they know and that are familiar to them, more so than Gen Z, for example, right? Where we're experiencing a sort of huge collapse of like institutional trust. And so recognizing, I think, that the team needs to be complete with folks who are not just telling older Americans what they should do, but have already earned the trust to feel more like an advisor and a collaborator. And so that was one of the really important things that came through in the report, which makes sense from a go-to-market standpoint. And I think beyond the team, building these kind of channel partnerships, I mentioned Careful, for example, go to market exclusively with financial institutions and banks and entities that these customers already know and trust. And so I think building out channel partnerships and figuring out whose brand you can borrow from and build that kind of referral and recognition with is a really really important piece of that as well.
Are there any kind of thoughts on who are the trusted voices and what are the trusted channels among older Americans today?
I can't remember if there was like specific stuff in the report. I mean, you have some brands like AARP, I think that very much resonate.
Or very
Yeah.
It's interesting
Again,
because I've seen ARP
yeah.
um, market themselves younger and younger. Right. So they
Hmm.
made a big push and effort to talk to people who are even in their 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting.
Well, I think that's a really important part of the playbook that I probably should have mentioned and would add is like aging adults is
All of us, don't say it.
treated as if it's one category, right? There's a massive difference, sort of to your longevity point, right? To the woman who came into her own running marathons in her 40s and is kind of still at it in her early 70s and is very fit and all that stuff, versus someone who is suffering from, maybe a kind of slow progressing, neurological disease, right? And is 64 but feels 84, And so I think recognizing that aging Americans or aging adults is a massive category and it's everyone kind of gets dollar signs in their eyes, but there are really clear and big subsegments within aging adults that we need to be really smart, right? Because you will really alienate someone if you've got a product which is built for someone who has a lot of care needs and not a lot of mobility and is in their 80s, but you kind of are seen to market that product and it pops up in my feed and I'm 62, right? And I
Yeah.
feel 52. And
Yeah.
so there's a huge opportunity and potential pitfall, right, in viewing this as a monolithic market, which it certainly is not.
So, inevitable question, but we should talk about AI
Mm.
and what opportunities have like, what does AI mean for this sector of the economy? Um, and are you like, do you think that there's like a real promise, or are there pockets where it's sort of over promising and under delivering? Like, what's like your realistic take of where we are with AI, in silver tech in particular, but
Yeah.
tech at large?
Um, I think that there's a couple of things with AI. One is, I think, back to this broad point, right? Like, older Americans are dealing with the same thing that the rest of us are. Like, we're all way more vulnerable to fraud than we were before, but for them, it's kind of on steroids. And so I think there are some emerging risks as it relates to AI for older Americans. I also think there are huge opportunities. In a way, I think that if you've watched older Americans compared to maybe teenagers interact with an iPhone, for example, what you can see is that even though we describe an iPhone as being really intuitive, it is intuitive to a child. It is not intuitive to someone, who is in their 60s or 70s. And it's because they've kind of come of age in the sort of PC era, right? And just
Yeah,
have not really learned to interact. AI, on the other hand, like ChatGPT, there's nothing to learn, right? The barriers are so low. You literally just talk to it like it is another person. And I actually think that has the ability to open up tech in a way for older adults that maybe has felt like harder for them to access, which I think is really cool. So I think there is an interesting kind of consumer angle to what can you do to deliver, the same way that a lot of older people like Alexa, turn on the lights, right? When you think about all the many things that we'll be able to say now, Alexa, get me an Uber, right? These sorts of things I think can potentially open up worlds for older people that maybe have felt harder for them to access, even though we've had a kind of explosion in tech availability and the ability to connect with people in remote places, et cetera, which has, in general, you would think decreased loneliness, but we know isolation um, and loneliness have become such a huge epidemic. I have not been convinced yet, though, that AI for companionship, like that is a place where it feels
yeah.
like it's maybe a promise that I would be skeptical if it came to fruition. We've seen lots of these things, um, that have lots of different formats. So it's a physical telephone that you pick up and have a conversation with someone. Um, there's different avatars. There's a stuffed animal or a pretend pet, and I am not really sure that there is a kind of golden solution there to the isolation question. So that feels to me like it's a bridge too far. But I think as it relates to autonomy, access, making technology less intimidating in a way for older Americans, I think there's some really cool opportunities there.
I feel like I'm actively Luddite when it comes to the promise of AI companionship, at least in the
Yeah.
foreseeable future. I actually think it's like more dangerous than it is helpful.
Yeah. I think it depends, the same way that I have watched my child, for example, benefit massively from having a conversation with ChatGPT about a math concept. Um, and it's been really effective for her. I can see there's a lot of older adults who might really like to sit down and say, remind me about the Battle of the Bulge,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So more
so
as
that's
entertainment than
yeah,
as
intellectual stimulation and the sort of
yeah.
the give and take of what feels like my very own tutor could be really cool. I think you're right when it's, "Hey, how was your day?" Right? I think very
Yeah.
quickly we as humans are gonna know that this is not a substitute for that real
Yeah.
human connection.
Yeah. Um, Courtney, are there any kind of data or research projects or anything that you're paying attention to that you're excited about? Kind of what is next for you guys?
Yeah. Well, one of our most recent investments, I guess I won't name it yet because we haven't announced it, but is in the home healthcare space. And I think that there are some really interesting opportunities for AI in terms of streamlining a lot of the manual and administrative processes around home healthcare, which is an exploding and very much inevitable space. People are going to want to age at home and
Aging in
all the
place.
things that that means. Yeah. And so I am really excited about that. And we've done a lot of work in terms of like where are the economics in home health? Where is there a real promise of technology? How can we create moats? And so that's a space that we are really excited about. And then another recent investment we did, which has been made public, is a company called Level Zero, which is in the sort of continuous hormone monitoring space. So back to like what's inevitable, hormones drive so many of our biological processes. And for women, they're very variable. So periodic testing of hormones is pretty useless, actually. Even day to day, they move a lot. Um, and so I feel like it's inevitable that by the time my girls are, adult women, our bodies will not be this sort of random black box that we have to guess at. And that the same way we can monitor our glucose levels, we will be able to monitor our cortisol levels or our estrogen levels or whatever it might be. And I think that's going to give us like so much cool insight. So that's an area that we have done a lot of research and kind of market intel around for the past couple of years, and we were super excited to make an investment in this year in this company, Level Zero. So those
Are
are two.
um are there areas that you are specifically hunting for an investment in?
Um, I would not say we are necessarily hunting right now in any area in particular. Just kind of, spending more and more time, I would say, focused on what is the real impact of AI on the workforce and
Yeah.
especially on kind of small businesses and entrepreneurs. So I don't know what solution I'm specifically hunting for in that space, but that's an area that I think is really dynamic and interesting and would love to kind of see more in. I think if anyone's still on, I'm going to cut it because I think her connection looks like it's dead. But it was great to chat with you, Leslie, if you can still hear this. And thanks for all of you guys who joined. And I would love to hear more. So, anyone who wants to reach out, we're always excited to meet cool founders who are building in the space. So, thanks so much.